Beijing spent $44 billion on the 2008 Olympics. Economists said it would transform the city forever. They were measuring the wrong thing. The conventional wisdom was bulletproof. Host an Olympic Games and you unlock decades of growth. New infrastructure, global prestige, permanent economic lift. Beijing's government believed it. The International Olympic Committee believed it. The financial press certainly believed it. So in the late 1990s, when China's leadership decided to bid for 2008, they weren't gambling. They were following the script that had worked for Seoul, Barcelona, Atlanta: build stadiums, build transit, build a global brand, reap returns forever. The numbers looked like vindication. The 2008 Games cost approximately $44 billion, the most expensive Olympics in history at that time. They built the Bird's Nest Stadium, the Water Cube Aquatic Center, a new subway system spanning 200 kilometers, airport terminals, highways. Visible, tangible, massive. Investment in brick and steel and concrete. The world watched and the world was impressed. But here's where the story splits. Everyone thought the Olympics would drive permanent migration into Beijing, permanent job creation, permanent demand for housing and services. That's what happened in Barcelona. That's what happened in Seoul. The assumption was so strong that entire neighborhoods were redeveloped on the belief that post-Olympic demand would sustain them. Nobody in this story was stupid. They were paid to see what they saw. The Games ended in September 2008. The global financial crisis hit weeks later, but that's a convenient scapegoat. The real problem started earlier. The Olympic venues themselves began emptying almost immediately. The Bird's Nest hosted 91,000 people for opening ceremonies. A year later, a typical event drew maybe 5,000. The water cube, built for world-class swimming, became a water park. Premium seating sat vacant. The infrastructure was supposed to be permanent. The subway system was, and it worked. But the housing market that ballooned in anticipation of Olympic-driven migration, it stalled. Apartment buildings built to capture post-Games demand sat half-occupied. Entire districts designed for Olympic workers became ghost neighborhoods. The supply had been created. The demand never materialized at the prices developers had priced in. This is where the consensus cracks. Economists looked at GDP growth and said the Olympics worked. Beijing's economy expanded after 2008. But that growth wasn't caused by the Games. It was driven by the same force that had driven Chinese growth for the previous decade: manufacturing exports and government stimulus spending. The Olympics were a correlation, not a cause. A massive, visible $44 billion correlation that nobody wanted to admit was irrelevant. Compare this to what actually happened. Beijing's real economic engine was export manufacturing and domestic investment in non-Olympic sectors. The Games consumed capital, $44 billion in capital that could have been deployed elsewhere. Not wasted necessarily, but allocated to a prestige project that generated lower returns than alternatives. The city grew despite the Olympics, not because of them. The real legacy wasn't economic, it was political. The Games gave the Chinese government a global platform and soft power at a moment when the country was ascending. That has value, just not the kind that shows up in construction jobs or sustained venue attendance. The Games signaled arrival. They didn't create an economic machine. They created a narrative. What about the venues themselves? The Bird's Nest hosted the 2015 World Championships in athletics. Then it became a tourist attraction. You pay to walk inside and take photos. The Water Cube became a water park with admission fees. They're not self-sustaining. They're monuments that require ongoing subsidy to exist. That's not a legacy. That's a maintenance bill. The housing market tells the clearest story. In the years after 2008, Beijing's real estate prices didn't collapse. They accelerated upward, but not because of Olympic demand. Because of government restrictions on new construction and continued migration from rural areas seeking urban opportunity. The Olympics had prepared the supply. The actual demand came from forces completely unrelated to sports. Here's what economists got wrong. They assumed that hosting an Olympics automatically unlocks growth, but growth requires sustained demand, not one-time events. The Games created a temporary spike in construction employment. That spike ended. The venues required permanent staffing and subsidies. Those costs continued. The math was always going to be negative in pure economic terms. But Beijing's government didn't care about pure economic returns, they cared about signaling. The Games cost $44 billion, yes, but that figure needs context. China's government spending that year exceeded $2 trillion. The Olympics were expensive but not budget-breaking, they were affordable symbolism. A way to say, we're here, we're capable, we're modern. That message worked. The infrastructure investments were real and useful. The subway system is still running, still expanding, still moving millions of people daily. That wasn't wasted, but it wouldn't have required the Olympics to justify. Beijing needed transit capacity. The Games just provided the political cover and urgency to build it. Without the Olympics, the same infrastructure would have been built anyway, just slower. The deeper lesson: mega events don't create economies. Economies create mega events. Beijing's growth was structural, driven by manufacturing, exports, and urbanization. The Olympics rode that wave and claimed credit for it. Every city that's hosted the Games since has fallen into the same trap, assuming the event causes the growth, when really the growth causes the event. The 44 billion figure is useful for one reason. It shows what governments are willing to spend on prestige. That's not irrational. Soft power has real value in geopolitics, but calling it an economic investment is misleading. It's a political investment dressed in economic language. The government spent $44 billion to say something to the world. The world listened. Mission accomplished. What happened after 2008? Beijing continued growing. But the growth rate didn't accelerate post-Olympics. It followed the same trajectory it had before. The venues became tourist attractions and maintenance obligations. The housing built in anticipation of Olympic demand got absorbed into the general real estate market. The narrative of Olympic-driven transformation faded. The real story of Beijing 2008 isn't about economics, it's about incentives. The government had incentives to host. The International Olympic Committee had incentives to award it. Developers had incentives to build. Construction companies had incentives to bid. Everyone was paid to see the Olympics as transformative. Nobody in this story was wrong, they were just working with different definitions of success. The legacy wasn't economic, it was a lesson in how to conflate prestige with prosperity. Beijing got what it wanted: global attention, soft power, and proof of capability. It just didn't get what the economists promised: sustained economic transformation. The city grew anyway for reasons that had nothing to do with the Games. The Olympics were the visible story. The invisible story was what actually mattered. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research. Subscribe to see how great fortunes are built on the gap between what we see and what's actually happening. There's a new case every week. This video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not financial advice. Always do your own research.